In the first video in this series, I talked briefly about personal dramas and epic dramas. And in this video, we are going to talk more about personal dramas and how they start, how they originate, and how we can become trapped in them. So to illustrate this, let's imagine that you have a school. It's an acting school. It's designed to teach children how to become actors in a theater. Not in the movies, but in a theater, where they're standing on a stage in front of an actual live audience. Now you can probably imagine that if you took a child that was inexperienced with acting and you put it out on an open stage in front of 500 people who were expecting to get some kind of performance, this would be a very difficult situation for the child, right? And most children probably would find it very difficult to deal with. They might totally freeze, they might become so embarrassed they never wanted to try again, and have many other reactions like that. So obviously that would be a kind of a cruel school, right? So let's say that this is a more compassionate school. And so instead of just shoving children out on the stage in front of the audience, the school has defined a number of plays. And in each play there's a sort of an overall storyline, and there's a certain cast of actors that are part of acting out the play on the stage. So this now means that a child that's inexperienced with acting can start playing a predefined role. It doesn't have to make up its own role, it doesn't have to define its own lines, and it doesn't have to define the storyline of the play. So this makes it a lot easier, and some children might want to start with just being an extra or one in the background who doesn't speak, just to get a feel for what it's like to be on stage. And so gradually a child can then work up to more and more advanced roles where it starts speaking and having a leading role in the play and so forth and so on. It might even work up to the ultimate test of being on stage alone with a monologue in front of the audience. So obviously this would be a more compassionate, more gradual way to learn. And this is comparable to what actually happens to a new life stream. So in my video about how the world was created, I talk about how there has been a creation of a succession of spheres. And our sphere, the one that we are in, is the seventh in our world of form. If you haven't watched that video, it's important that you watch it because it will give you really the overall picture of the purpose of creation, the purpose of our world of form. So what I explained in there is that a new co-creator starts on what we can call a natural planet. And a natural planet is one that's very different from Earth. Earth is an unnatural planet which you can see by all of the conflict, all of the suffering that's happening. This isn't happening on a natural planet. So let's now look at a new life stream is created, and it's in its first embodiment. It takes embodiment on a natural planet. But even so, a new life stream has a very small sense of self, we might say. It's localized, it's focused on a certain point. So this would still be difficult if a new life stream was just thrown into a natural planet in the first embodiment and had to fend for itself. So instead a new life stream is put into a specific environment. And we can compare it to a play in a theater. So it's put in a localized environment. There are other beings in that environment. There is a predefined storyline for that society that the society is trying to act out. And there are different roles that are defined in that storyline. And so this means again that a new life stream can start playing minor roles, and if it really applies itself, it can gradually expand its ability to take on more and more complex roles. So it can take a long time for a new life stream to basically work its way up on its planet, its natural planet, to more and more complicated roles. And there's a certain overall timeline, but it's not like there's any force applied to a new life stream. It can take whatever time it takes and experiment with different roles. But there will come a point where that life stream has pretty much played all of the roles that you can play on that planet. So in other words, we can look at it and say a given planet was created with a certain design, a certain form, and a certain natural environment, and there's a certain number of roles that have been predefined by the Ascended Masters for that planet. And a given life stream will eventually, over time, if it applies itself, it'll get to play all of the roles that can be played. So it's like it'll play high and low and this and that, and all different kind of roles in the play, until it eventually has played them all and played them well. So there can come a point where a new life stream is facing the need that if it wants to continue to grow, it needs to step up to a higher level. And the higher level is basically that the life stream, instead of playing a predefined role, it defines its own role. In the beginning, it can be that it is playing a predefined role, but it goes off script. It comes up with something that isn't in the script, that's better than what's in the script, and it makes the play more intense, more engaging for the audience. But eventually it comes to a point when it needs to define its own role in society. And so the question now becomes, does the life stream want to do this? And this very much depends on how the life stream has seen the process it has gone through, the process of growth. So we can say that if you're playing a role in a theater, you go into the theater, you put on a costume, you put on makeup, you learn the lines, you're stepping onto the stage, and you're living yourself into the role. And the more you can live yourself into it, the more engaged the audience will be. So you will see that the best actors are the ones who are so fully identified with the role that while they're on stage, they are the character they're playing. They don't see it as a role. They're acting this out. It's real for them. But of course, once the final curtain falls and they go off the stage, they realize, yeah, I wasn't Hamlet or Ophelia or Romeo. I'm myself. And so you take off the costume and makeup, and you return to your normal state of mind. Now, you may very well have grown from playing the role. And that's, of course, the whole purpose of playing the role, is that you grow from it. So you actually, you have expanded your sense of self by playing the role. But the thing is, you may, while you're playing the role, identify yourself with it. But there comes a point where you snap out of that identification, and now you realize you're not the role. So there is a certain, what we might say, interchange between being identified with the role and returning to your normal identity. Namely, that you are more than the role because you're a spiritual being. So there are some new life streams that they develop this sense that they're forced to play these roles. And they're forced to play them a certain way. And some can even have a sense that it's the Ascended Masters who are forcing them to play the role. Others have a sense that it's other people or their environment, their society, that are forcing them to play this role. And this means that over time they can gradually build this sense that I'm not really responsible for my life because I haven't defined the role myself. Therefore, I'm not really responsible for the role. So this means that they sort of go into kind of playing the role mechanically instead of, as I said, really putting some of their own personality into it and making it more intense or even going off script a little bit. So, but there are others who over time, they develop this idea or this attitude that, yeah, I haven't defined the role, but I still have some freedom within the role to act it out, and I actually enjoy that. So they don't feel like it's forced upon them. So we might say that some new life streams can develop this idea that they are victims of the role or their environment. And others either don't develop it or they rise above it and realize, no, I'm not a victim because I can make the role my own. And so we can say that the first group, who sees themselves as a victim, they are not taking responsibility for themselves. Whereas the other group, they are taking responsibility. So the first group, they don't take responsibility for having created the role or the ability to make it their own or do the best. In other words, you could say that there is a predefined environment, right? And as I said, it's necessary with a predefined environment because a new life stream couldn't deal with being an empty space. There's got to be something it can relate to, or it just couldn't function psychologically. But the idea of putting a new life stream in a predefined environment is that eventually the life stream will have experimented with its environment to the point where it's mastered it, and now it's realizing it's ready to start going beyond the predefined environment. But those who don't develop that approach, they can come to see themselves as victims of their environment. They feel like they're being forced by the environment to play a certain role, and that they don't have any freedom to make it their own. So instead of looking towards transcending the environment, they are almost developing the idea that they don't want to transcend or they are not able to transcend. So, as I said, there comes a certain point where if the life stream is to grow, it must step up and take responsibility for itself. And those who do that, they can then, as I say, they can define their own roles, they can define a group of these co-creators, can define a whole play. They can really take their environment, their society on a natural planet in a totally new direction. And there can still be room on a natural planet for those who are not willing to take that responsibility, because there will still be predefined roles. It's just that instead of these roles being predefined by the Ascended Masters who created the planet, they are now predefined by the people who embody on the planet, by those who have taken responsibility for defining their own play. But they will still define roles in such a way there's room for the other people who just play those roles. And so now we need to focus on what happens to those beings who will not take responsibility for themselves. And when you don't take responsibility, what happens is, even on a natural planet, there is going to be a certain division that's going to start happening between those who have taken responsibility and those who haven't. And that means that those who are going to have taken responsibility, they're going to grow much faster than those who have not, because those who have not are basically going to tread water. They're going to stand still and not really grow. So all of a sudden there is now an upward movement created in, I've talked about the collective consciousness. So the collective consciousness on the planet there's an upward movement created by those who are growing, who have taken responsibility for themselves. And there's a group of beings who are resisting that, upward movement. And this can make them feel that they are the victims of, or they're being suppressed by or forced by those who are growing. So there can be a certain tension that arises even on a natural planet. And so what happens is, you can say, is that those live streams who are not growing, they are observing that there are others that are. So let's just say, to refer to something we are familiar with on Earth, that there are those who are growing and they become scientists, and they become better and better at creating technology that makes life easier. And so they can create all kinds of technology. But then there are those who are not taking responsibility for themselves, and they are they're not willing to take initiative and are not willing to try something new, so they become workers who are working in whatever companies are created by those who have more initiative. I'm not saying this is a totally valid comparison, because we have the X factor of the fallen beings, but I'll talk about that in the next one where I talk about epic dramas. So, but still you can see that there can be that sort of a division in the people who are embodying, even on a natural planet. And so what happens in the mind of a being who refuses to take responsibility? Well, what happens is, it's observing there are other people who are taking responsibility, who are doing well, who are growing, and it knows that it isn't really growing, so it has to explain why. Now you will notice, if you look at yourself, if you're a spiritual being and you're open to these videos, it's because you've always been curious about life, so you've always been seeking answers. But I know you can look at Earth and you can see there are many people, probably we all had family members who were like this. They were not looking for answers. They didn't want to know more. They didn't want to understand how life works or what the purpose is. But the reason for this is not that they don't have the drive to know more, but that they've suppressed it. So in other words, all beings, and we need to understand this, we need to understand something about free will, because a new co-creator has free will, but it can only choose based on what it sees inside its mind. So as I said, it starts with a very localized sense of self and a very localized view of its environment, a very localized understanding of its environment. And it can make free choices. There's no outside force forcing the co-creator to make certain choices. But it can only choose based on what it can see. So there is a certain drive built in to expand our sense of self, expand what we see and what we understand. But again, free will, our ability to choose, is based on what we can see. So now those people who are growing, they're constantly expanding their sense of self, their understanding of their environment. So as you expand your sense of self, you can see more options, meaning your will is still free, but you have more options to choose from. Whereas those who refuse to grow, they go into their minds, as I've said before with duality, when you go into duality, their minds becomes closed systems, closed boxes. But as I said, you still have a certain drive to grow. It's built into every life stream. So in order to refuse to take responsibility, and in order to stand there and watch that there are other beings on your planet that are growing, you have to explain this. Because the desire to know is also a desire to be able to explain your environment. So you now have these life streams that are on a natural planet. They are refusing to take responsibility for creating or defining their own roles. And so they go into this state of mind of refusing to they're in a sense refusing to grow with the majority of the beings on their planet. And so they now have to explain why. They have to explain why they're not growing, why they don't have to grow, why they can't grow, why they don't need to grow. In other words, they have to come up with some kind of explanation for why they're not transcending themselves, why they're not taking responsibility for themselves. And this is the origin of what we can call personal dramas. Because in order to explain this, they are creating some kind of drama in their minds. So let's just take a simple example. Let's just say you have a group of live streams who are all attracted to running on the track. They are running some the 500 meters, some the 100 meters, some the 10,000 meter. They're all runners. And some of them get better than others. So there's a competition among them. But now they have a new trainer who tells them, if you are willing to do certain things, you can take your running to a new level. You can become much faster. And some are willing to do this, and others are not. In other words, they're not willing to train harder, become more conscious of how their bodies work and how they can train their bodies. They just want to keep running the way they've been running so far. So now those who are choosing not to grow, they fall behind, of course. And they have to explain why. So now they create this drama that, oh, it's because the others are cheating. They're using doping. Or they know something that those who are not growing are not allowed to know. So in other words, they create a story, a drama in their minds why they can't do what the others are doing. And in a sense you could say, well, didn't you say that there comes a point where a live stream has played the predefined roles and now it's ready to create its own role? So couldn't you say that these live streams who refuse to grow, they are just creating their own role? And of course they are. So you now have on a natural planet, you have some live streams who are creating a role based on growth. They are transcending themselves. They know that the purpose for creating the role is to transcend themselves. But you also have some that are creating a role based on not wanting to transcend themselves. And they are creating a role that justifies why they're not transcending themselves. Aren't they both just exercising their free will and their ability or to the opportunity to create their own role? Yes, exactly. They are. Absolutely. At this point, there's nothing here. We're not talking right and wrong here. We're just talking about different reactions, right? So, the thing is, though, that there is a difference between the two. A fundamental difference. Because what I have explained in several videos, including my How the World Was Created, is that the Creator knew that by creating extensions of itself that have self-awareness, imagination, and free will, some beings could get lost. So therefore, everything is created out of what I have called the one mind, or the Christ mind, or the Buddha nature. So this means what? This means you have a new live stream. It embodies for the first time on a natural planet. It has a very localized sense of self. It plays a predefined role, but that predefined role is designed by the Ascended Masters. So it's designed in such a way that it helps the live stream grow, expand its sense of self. But how does a live stream expand its sense of self? By connecting to the one mind. Now, as I have explained in some other videos, there are, if you look at Earth, it's a little different on natural planets, but just as an example, 144 levels of consciousness possible on Earth. And a new live stream comes in for the first time at the 48th level. And at that level, you have some sense that you're connected to the one mind. and through that also to your higher self and your ascended masters. So you have a sense of connection. And the way you grow, the way you transcend yourself, is that you gradually expand that sense of connection to the one mind. What does that mean? Well, what does your connection to the one mind do for you? It is actually this connection that helps you come out of the role you're playing after the curtain falls. As I said, if you're a really good actor, you're completely identified with the role when you're on stage. But the moment the curtain falls and you're off stage, you come back to your normal sense of identity. But you may have grown from playing the role because you actually had to transcend your sense of self to play the role better than you did last time. So what is it that allows you to become aware, hey, I'm not the role, I'm more than a role? Well, that's your connection to the one mind. So now, as a live stream begins to define its own role, there is, in a sense, when you're defining your own role, there is a risk that you can become more identified with it. Because when you didn't define the role, you knew, this is something I'm taking on. But when you're defining it yourself, you can more easily become identified with it. But as long as you have a connection to the Christ mind, you can always come out of it and realize I'm more than the role. And what does that mean? That means when you realize you're more than the role you were playing, you can, after a time, after the play is over, you step back, you look at your performance, you say, is there something I want to change? Is there something I want to do better? And then you do that until the next play. And so that's how you keep growing. But it's always the connection to the one mind that allows you to avoid being fully identified with the role. You may be identified with it while you're playing it, but you can always come out of it again and then evaluate and look at it. So, so this is essentially what it means that you become aware of the spiritual path. Like many of us grew up without any awareness of the spiritual path. At a certain age, we found a spiritual teaching or guru, and we become aware there's a spiritual path that we were never told about as we were growing up. And what allows us to recognize that is our connection to the one mind, where you can now, all of a sudden you step back and you say, do I really want to continue on the track I was put on as a result of my upbringing? Or do I want to take charge of my own life and raise my consciousness? Okay, so this is the connection to the one mind. So now that group of live streams who refuse to step up and define their own roles, what do? Well, they're still defining their own roles. But the role is not designed in order to help them grow. The role is designed in order to justify why they are not growing. Which means what? It means that implicit in the role, built into the role, is a denial of the one mind. They are denying either that it exists or that they are connected to it. You see? And that means that even though those live streams are just defining their own role, like the live streams who are growing, they, the ones who are not taking responsibility, they are becoming identified with the role because they are denying the possibility of connecting to the one mind. So how can they step out of the role? Well, they can, because the conscious you, as I've explained many times, can always step outside of the outer personality and experience itself as pure awareness. But everything in the role is designed to prevent a live stream from doing this, so that the conscious you is always focusing its attention on the role and identifying with the role, and never really realizing that it can step outside of it. So this is a fundamental difference. It's actually a difference that Jesus explained 2,000 years ago. There's a scene where a young man comes to Jesus and says, basically, I would like to follow you, but my father just died. Can you please allow me to bury him first? And Jesus turns to him and says, let the dead bury their dead. And what does he mean? I mean, corpses don't run around burying other corpses. So what he meant was, metaphorically speaking, that the people in the man's family, they were spiritually dead. Because as he said, unless you partake of the body and flesh and blood of the Son of Man, you have no life in you. In other words, if you don't have the Christ consciousness, the connection to the Christ mind, you are spiritually dead. And that is what the case with all of these people who refuse to take responsibility and become identified with their roles. So that's why he said, if you seek to save your life, this separate life, you will lose eternal life, but only if you follow Christ. If you are willing to transcend your sense of self, will you have life in you leading to eternal life, namely the ascension. So you see that this is the origin of personal dramas. They are based on a denial of your ability to transcend yourself, to connect to something outside your own mind, to take full responsibility for yourself. So we can say that these people who are spiritually dead, they're still defining their own role, but they're not realizing it, they're not admitting it, they're not seeing it. And that means they can't step outside, evaluate the role, and say, is this really what I want? You see, this is what the beings who are growing, the life streams who are growing, once in a while, they will step back and say, is this what I want? Do I want more of this, or do I want something better? And this is, as I also explained in the video about how the world was created, we are designed to be co-creators. Ultimately, we are co-creators with the Creator, or in a more immediate, in an unascended sphere, we are co-creators with the ascended masters who created this sphere. So if you embody on Earth, you are a co-creator with the ascended masters who are working with Earth. And so, how you grow as a co-creator is very simple. On Earth, we have four lower bodies. We have the identity mind, the mental mind, the emotional mind, and then of course the physical. So how we co-create is we formulate an image first in the identity mind. This is based on our sense of who we are. Then we make it more concrete in the mental mind, and then we give it a direction and energy, momentum, in the emotional mind, so we are projecting that image onto what I've called the matter light, which is the basic energy that makes up our material realm, the physical octave, or even the four octaves of our world of form. So we are creating a mental image. It's like the film strip in a movie theater. And the white light that drives the projector is the light we're receiving from our I Am Presence and the Ascended Masters. Passes through these, actually 3 film strips. We have actually 4 because there's a subconscious attached to the physical body. So it takes on the forms of that and then it's projected onto the movie screen. And the whole idea of being a co-creator is that you do this. We are experimenting. We are like children in a sandbox. We can create anything we want in the sandbox because we can't hurt the sand. We can always erase whatever sandcastle we created. And so what we do is we formulate mental images, we project it onto the screen of life, we receive physical circumstances back that reflect what we projected. But as long as we are connected beings, we realize, oh, what I get back is a result of what I projected out. So if I don't like what came back, I change what I project out, and then I change what comes back. This is what it means, another way to describe that you take responsibility for yourself. You realize you created your own role, you defined your own role, and through that role you're projecting onto the screen of life, and what comes back to you is a result of what you projected out. So if you don't like it, you change what you're projecting out, you change what comes back. This is co-creation. When you go into this denial, the refusal to grow, you are creating a role that denies this, that denies that you are a co-creator. So what is built into all of the roles that you could possibly create here in what I've called the consciousness of separation is that what comes back to you in the form of physical circumstances has no connection or very little connection to what you're projecting out. In other words, something else created the environment you are in. God, the angry God up in the sky, created the earth and created me as a sinner, and therefore there's not much I can do. Or impersonal laws of nature created the earth and evolution created me, and there's nothing I can do about it. You see, you go into a passive state of mind. You are not a co-creator anymore. You're actually a de-creator. Because you're still receiving light from your I Am Presence, you're still formulating mental images in the 3 higher levels of your mind, you're still projecting it upon the matter light, but you are denying that what comes back has anything to do with your state of mind and what you're sending out. And therefore, you can't change what's coming back. Well, you may think you can, and you may to some degree be able to, but how are you going to do it? You don't do it by going to the cause. In other words, we have all heard of cause and effect. So the images in your mind is cause. What comes back in form of physical circumstances is effect. Obviously, the most effective way to change the effect is to change the cause. But when you go into this denial, you can't see that. So what do? Well, you have to try to change things at the level of effect. You have to try to change your circumstances by doing what? Changing other people or conquering nature. So this is what leads into this that you see on Earth, where you could say that if you want to look at Earth, you can see most people are trapped in this. The feeling victims, the denial that they're co-creators. And what's the essence of what they're doing? Well, they're suffering. Like the Buddha said 2,500 years ago, because when you go into this state of mind, you will be suffering. Why? Because you're not in control of your life. You are a victim of what you see as external circumstances. And there are other people on the planet who won't do what you do. So you're in a constant struggle with them, and that causes suffering. And you think, in reality, people are trying to overcome the suffering. They're trying to get away from the suffering. But they don't recognize that the suffering is in their own minds and it's created in their own minds. They think the suffering is a result of the outer conditions they're experiencing. So how can I overcome the suffering? I have to change the outer conditions, which means changing other people. So that's why there's constant conflict. And of course, how effective is it to try and change the effect at the level of effect? Well, not very efficient. But some people manage to do it by forcing others or by fooling others, which is really where the fallen beings come in, as I will talk about in the next video. But most people are just there, passive victims. I look at the people I grew up with in my family. They have that exact attitude to life. They're not negative people. They're not really suffering that much. They're fairly content with their lives, but they still believe that they were born in this little town in Horsens. They were born in a working class family. They're going to be working class jobs the rest of their life, and they're going to live in that town for the rest of their life. They can't even conceive of transcending that role because they think they haven't defined it, so how can they change it? You can't be anything else than what you were brought up to be. And so all I'm trying to say with all this long explanation is that this is the origin of personal dramas. People refuse to grow, they refuse to acknowledge they are co-creators, they refuse to acknowledge that what is coming back in the material world is a result of what they are projecting out. And therefore they go into this victim consciousness, and they have to explain why they can't change their circumstances. And this is the drama. This is how they create dramas. Now, of course, I understand that you have to be careful with a teaching like this and not take it too far, in the sense that, the teaching is implying that you should be able to change your mind enough and you could change any circumstance you're facing here on Earth. And but that isn't the case, because you're not the only one on Earth. I know there are some non-dual teachers who say, oh, I'm the only one here, but that's not the case. We are 7 billion people on the planet, and all are individual beings who have free will. And so you can change a lot of things in your personal life, but only within the context you're in here on Earth, which means the collective consciousness. So there's a limit to how far you can take a teaching like this. But what there is no limit to is your ability to change what goes on inside your mind, how you experience life on Earth, how you look at it. And this is actually what the Buddha demonstrated by what he called non-attachment, overcoming your attachments to specific conditions or outcomes. And that's something for another video. But what I'm saying here is this. The collective consciousness on Earth has co-created the conditions you see, all the limitations, the limited natural resources, for example, is a result of the collective consciousness going into this denial of our co-creative abilities. Because what do most people believe? Well, they believe that there's a certain amount, fixed amount of natural resources, and that's all there is. What does co-creation say? Co-creation is based on we are receiving energy from the spiritual realm, which we are then bringing into the Earth, into the energy field of Earth. And as more light is brought in, more resources are available. So there is constant possibility of expansion. But when you go into this denial and separation, you're saying, oh, there's only a fixed amount and we have to fight each other to get it. And this is why you see the rich nations hoarding natural resources and the poor nations only very slowly getting more affluent. And this is just a pattern you see throughout history. So again, this is based on this, but because there are so many people are in the state of consciousness, there is a limit to what you or even a group of spiritual people can do. We can slowly raise the collective consciousness by being an embodiment, which is part of why we're here. But we can't just override the collective consciousness in one fell swoop. It's like some spiritual people I met dream about creating this proof that there's a spiritual reality, but it can't be done because of the collective consciousness. So anyway, I'm digressing. The essential thing to understand about personal dramas is they're based on people's refusal to take responsibility and their need to explain and justify this. And of course, it's important to understand, we're talking about personal dramas, but they have a collective aspect. But what I mean with personal dramas is that these are dramas relating to what kind of being you are and how you can live your life. Not some epic cause, as we'll talk about in the next video about epic dramas. So people have collectively created these personal dramas like we are working class people, or we are Jews and we are Arabs, or we are Christians and we are Muslims, and we are capitalists and we are communists. So they have created these dramas where they identify themselves as a group with a certain role. But it's still a personal drama, even though it's created collectively. And the reason why it's important to understand this is that we have all been brought up in a certain drama. And in order to really make spiritual progress, there comes a point where we have to look at this and say, okay, what was the drama I was brainwashed, indoctrinated with as I was growing up, and how can I transcend it? Do I really want to be bound by this for the rest of my life? And so that's, of course, what's part of the purpose of these discourses, is to help us grow out of these dramas and begin to look at them. So we will talk about some of these specific dramas, but we also in the next one I'm going to talk specifically about the epic dramas and where they originated, because that's a whole other level of drama.